The clear winter air of Boston filled the room as afternoon light filtered through the window. Caroline Wells stood in her kitchen wearing her hospital uniform, hurriedly preparing dinner. Having finished a 12-hour shift, she looked tired, but her eyes were still full of kindness. "Mom, look." 8-year-old Adrienne came running up, holding up a drawing. The paper showed a dog drawn with colorful crayons. "This is Buddy. He's my imaginary friend's dog." Caroline smiled and gently stroked her son's hair. "That's a beautiful drawing, Adrienne. Should we put it on the refrigerator?" Adrienne nodded happily and began enthusiastically explaining the dog's features, occasionally stumbling over his words. His eyes brightened with each description. For him, with his developmental disability, animals, especially dogs, were special. Their unconditional love and acceptance were a source of comfort for Adrienne, who sometimes struggled with the complexities of human relationships. From the living room came the sound of her husband Greg closing his laptop. He worked as a project manager at an architectural firm and had wrapped up work early tonight. "Harold called," Greg said as he entered the kitchen. There was a hint of tension in his expression. "About the Christmas gathering." Caroline paused briefly and took a deep breath. Her relationship with her parents, Martha and Harold, was complicated. Living in an upscale neighborhood in Newton, Massachusetts, they clearly favored Caroline's sister Marianne and her perfect family. Marianne's 3 children all excelled in sports and academics, and were constant sources of pride for their grandparents. In contrast, Adrienne's developmental disability seemed like an unacceptable reality for Martha and Harold. If he tried a little harder, he could be normal, Martha's words echoed in Caroline's memory. "What did he say?" Caroline asked her husband. "The usual. They want the whole family to gather at their house. Marianne's family will all be there too," Greg chose his words carefully. "I'll leave it up to you whether we go or not." Caroline gazed out the window. Last Christmas had passed in a tense atmosphere, with Martha making several critical comments about Adrienne's behavior. After returning home, Caroline had broken down crying in the car. Since then, she had kept contact with her parents to a minimum. "I don't know," Caroline said hesitantly. Watching Adrienne innocently putting his dog drawing on the refrigerator made her heart ache. She was torn between her desire to maintain family bonds and her powerful instinct to protect her son. Greg gently placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But remember, you and Adrienne are my top priority." Caroline smiled and took her husband's hand. "Thank you. I'll think about it." The phone rang, and Caroline sighed. The display showed, "Mom." "Caroline." Martha's voice carried the refined tone of a privileged life. "Did Harold call you about Christmas?" "Yes, Mom. Greg told me." "Wonderful. You'll come, of course?" "Marianne's children are all looking forward to it. Amanda especially, she won a piano recital competition this year. She'll play a little for us on Christmas Eve." Caroline closed her eyes silently. Martha always talked about Marianne's children's successes but rarely asked about Adrienne. "How is Adrienne doing?" Martha's tone changed. "Has his problematic behavior improved?" "Mom, Adrienne doesn't have problematic behavior," Caroline said in a quiet but firm voice. "He just understands the world in his own way." On the other end of the line, Martha made a small clicking sound with her tongue. "Yes, of course. But you know, Christmas is a special time. I hope everyone can relax and enjoy themselves." The meaning behind her words was clear. Martha hoped Adrienne wouldn't cause any problems. Caroline immediately became defensive. "Adrienne is a wonderful child, Mom. If you can't understand that." Of course," Martha quickly interrupted. "We just want to have a nice time with all our grandchildren. Harold is looking forward to it too." After the conversation ended, Caroline leaned against the kitchen counter, deep in thought. Greg approached quietly. "What are you going to do?" he asked softly. Caroline looked at Adrienne, who was now sitting on the living room floor, eagerly poring over a dog encyclopedia. His pure joy and curiosity warmed her heart. "We'll go," she decided firmly. "Family is family, even if they hurt us sometimes." But, a determined light shone in her eyes, "I won't let Adrienne get hurt." Greg hugged her. "Right. We'll get through this together." Christmas morning, the snow-covered streets of Newton looked like a picture postcard. Caroline checked on Adrienne in the rearview mirror. He was wearing his new red sweater and gently stroking a handmade Christmas card on his lap. Earlier that morning, they had exchanged modest gifts at home. Adrienne had been thrilled with a dog encyclopedia, and Greg had given Caroline a simple but heartfelt silver pendant. "It'll be fine," Caroline whispered to herself. "It's just one day." When they arrived at the Simmons mansion, several cars were already parked outside. The front door opened, and Martha greeted them with perfectly styled hair and an expensive Christmas sweater. "Finally, you're here. Everyone's been waiting." Martha gave Caroline a light kiss and nodded to Greg. When her eyes turned to Adrienne, her expression subtly hardened. "Adrienne, don't I get a kiss?" Adrienne stared at his shoes and said in a small voice, "Hello, Grandma." Martha should have known that he struggled with hugs and physical contact. "Well, never mind," Martha sighed. "Come in, please. Marianne's children have already started opening their presents from Santa." Entering the living room, they saw a massive Christmas tree decorated with elaborate ornaments. Around it, Marianne's children, Amanda, Jason, and Emma, were excitedly shouting as they tore open one gift after another. Piles of expensive-looking presents were forming on the floor. Marianne and her husband James watched with satisfaction, while Harold smiled from his favorite armchair. "Caroline, you're late," Marianne said to her sister. She always looked perfect, and her confident demeanor sometimes made Caroline feel diminished. "Look what the children got." Amanda showed off the latest tablet, Jason an expensive drone, and Emma a sophisticated dollhouse set. Each gift clearly cost hundreds of dollars. "Those are lovely," Caroline smiled and placed her hand on Adrienne's shoulder. He was watching his cousin's presents with bright eyes. "Now it's Adrienne's turn," Martha said, bringing out a medium-sized box from under the tree. "This is something special. From Grandpa and Grandma." The room grew quiet. Even Marianne's children watched expectantly. Adrienne shyly accepted the box and carefully began unwrapping it. Caroline sat beside her son, smiling gently. Greg stood at the edge of the room, looking tense with his arms crossed. When Adrienne opened the box, a moment of silence followed. He looked inside with confusion. What he carefully took out was a bag of dog treats, the kind commonly found in supermarket discount sections. It read, "Bacon-flavored dog biscuits." "This is..." Adrienne stammered. "My present." The blood drained from Caroline's face. Greg took several steps forward, his face beginning to flush. Marianne's children exchanged glances and started giggling. "What's so funny?" Martha wore a cold smile. "Adrienne loves dogs, doesn't he? He can share them with our Patty." Martha's Pekingese was lying in the corner of the room. Tears began to form in Adrienne's eyes, and he looked up at his mother in confusion. Caroline bit her lip and clenched her fists. Her body trembled with anger, but she didn't want to explode in front of her son. From the corner of her eye, she saw Greg step forward, his face contorted with rage. "Wait," Caroline said quietly, grabbing her husband's arm. She slowly stood up and took Adrienne's hand. "Thank you, Mom and Dad. But we need to leave now." "What are you talking about?" Martha pretended to be confused. "Lunch is about to be served. And didn't Adrienne like our gift?" "Caroline, don't spoil the child," Harold spoke for the first time. "Teach him to have a sense of humor. This was just a joke." Greg was about to speak, but Caroline shook her head slightly. With a voice filled with quiet anger and determination, she said, "Adrienne is perfect. He doesn't need your sense of humor. She helped Adrienne with his coat, left the dog treats behind, and took her son's hand. "Let's go home." Marianne's children were still giggling. Marianne herself looked at Caroline with a complex expression, a mixture of criticism and pity. "Caroline, wait," Harold stood up. "Aren't you being a bit too sensitive? It's a joke, understand." Caroline didn't turn around. With calm but resolute steps, she led her son out of the house. Just before closing the front door, she heard Martha's voice. "Well, what an overreaction." Once in the car, Adrienne quietly asked, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" Caroline's heart ached. She hugged her son tightly. "Not at all, Adrienne. You're a perfect child. It was Grandpa and Grandma who were wrong." Hot tears ran down her cheeks. Greg sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His face was twisted with anger, but he was controlling his emotions for Adrienne's sake. "Let's go home," Caroline said gently. "Let's have our real Christmas." Caroline's family arrived home just after 3 in the afternoon. Adrienne was exhausted and fell into a short nap. Greg had retreated to the garage, where sounds of him violently breaking something could be heard. Probably the shelf he had been putting off repairing for a week. Caroline sat on the living room sofa, covering her face with both hands. Waves of anger and sadness washed over her, making her body tremble slightly. For years, she had endured her parents' cold attitude. But today's incident was the cruelest act yet. They had deliberately humiliated a child, her child, in front of everyone. She opened her phone screen and hesitantly launched a social media app. She rarely posted anything, but now words were about to overflow from within her. Taking a deep breath, she began typing. "Today, on Christmas, my parents gave lavish gifts to everyone except my son. Inside his box was a bag of dog treats. I bit my lip and clenched my fists. My mother smiled and said, 'You can share them with our dog.' I said nothing and quietly took my son home." Caroline read over her post once before publishing it. She hadn't specified names, but local friends would know who wrote it. Her finger trembled over the post button. Was this the right response? Or just an emotional reaction? But remembering Adrienne's face at that moment hardened her resolve. She pressed the button. "Are you okay?" Greg entered the living room. There was sawdust on his hands. "Yes," Caroline put down her phone and sighed deeply. "I just posted on social media. I didn't use names." Greg frowned. "Really? That's..." "It was necessary," Caroline said quietly. "I don't want anyone to think their behavior is acceptable anymore." That night, they had a normal dinner and watched a movie with Adrienne. Their son was a bit quiet, but as the day progressed, he gradually began to regain his spirits. Caroline forgot about the social media post and focused on spending time with her son. The next morning, as she was preparing to leave for her hospital shift, her phone kept ringing. Dozens of social media notifications and messages had arrived. "What is this?" She stared at the screen in surprise. Her post had spread explosively. Starting from local community groups, within hours it had reached groups for parents of children with developmental disabilities, and then gone nationwide with the hashtag #HolidayHorrorStories. The comment section was flooded with messages of empathy and encouragement. She had intended it as just an emotional outpouring. Despite posting anonymously, why had it spread so widely? Her phone rang. It was her best friend, Sarah. "Caroline, your post was just featured on the local news," Sarah's voice was excited. "The headline is Discrimination and Family Abuse, the controversy sparked by a Christmas gift." "What?" Caroline was speechless. "But I didn't write any names." "True, but..." Sarah continued hesitantly. "Locals know who your parents are. The Simmons family is well known, especially since Harold is the Chamber of Commerce president." Caroline collapsed into a chair. She had never imagined her small post would create such a large response. Before she could think, another call came in. It was from Marianne. "Caroline, what have you done?" Her sister's voice trembled with anger. "Do you know what's happening to Mom and Dad? Their phones won't stop ringing, their mailboxes are full of hate mail. They might even be expelled from their church group." "I didn't name names," Caroline said weakly. "But everyone knows." Marianne shouted. "Have you checked social media? The local community forums are on fire. Everyone's saying, 'Oh, those Simmons couple.'" Caroline checked the local pages on her smartphone. Indeed, while no real names were mentioned, the comment sections were full of hints and speculation. That wealthy couple in the upscale neighborhood, Mr. H from the Chamber of Commerce, and so on. Just then, a call came in from Martha. Caroline didn't have the courage to answer and let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, an enraged message arrived. "Caroline Elizabeth Wells. Delete this malicious lie of a post immediately. Your father was given dirty looks by 3 people at the supermarket this morning. Business partners have called. You are ruining our reputation." In the week after the holiday, the situation worsened. The local newspaper published an article titled, "Anonymous Accusation Reveals Family Discrimination." Organizations supporting children with developmental disabilities issued statements condemning such acts as a form of abuse. Harold and Martha's social circle rapidly collapsed. Longtime friends began to distance themselves, church groups suggested they take a break, and whispers could be heard behind Harold's back at his golf club. Thursday night, when Caroline returned from her night shift, Martha's luxury sedan was parked in the driveway. Her mother had come alone. "Delete it," Martha demanded at the doorstep. Signs of fatigue were visible beneath her perfect makeup. "Delete that post right now and issue a correction." "Why?" Caroline asked calmly. "What I wrote is the truth." "Truth?" Martha's voice trembled. "It was just a joke. You've ruined our lives. Friends won't answer our calls, no one at church speaks to us. Harold says it's starting to affect his business." Caroline leaned against the doorframe, staring at her mother. The woman who once seemed so powerful now appeared small and diminished. "You should feel public shame now, just as you publicly shamed Adrienne," Caroline said quietly. "I won't delete the social media post." Martha reddened, clenching her fists. "You always pretend to be the victim. Always seeking special treatment. If Adrienne were a normal child, none of this would have happened." "Get out," Caroline said in an icy voice. "Get out right now." Martha faltered for a moment but quickly walked toward her car. Before starting the engine, she opened the window and shouted, "You'll regret this, Caroline. We're family." Caroline closed the door and slid to the floor with her back against it. She ran her fingers through her hair and took a deep breath. Guilt? No, that wasn't it. What she felt was a sense of release that had been suppressed for a long time. Finally, she had spoken up. And the world had heard her voice. Greg appeared from around the corner of the hallway and sat beside his wife. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Caroline smiled weakly. 3 days later, Caroline received an unexpected call. It was from Marianne. "Dad has been taken to the hospital," her sister's voice was distraught. "Heart attack. He's in intensive care now." Caroline froze. She knew Harold suffered from high blood pressure, but she hadn't expected her post and the sudden social isolation to lead to this. "How is he?" She tried to regain her nurse's composure. "He's out of danger, but weakened," Marianne sighed. "Caroline, you bear some responsibility for this. Dad hasn't slept or eaten properly for days. It's clear this stress triggered it." Caroline was at a loss for words. She felt her chest tighten with anger and guilt. "I hope he recovers," she answered quietly, but didn't mention whether she intended to visit the hospital. That evening, she had a long conversation with Greg. "Should I go see him?" Caroline asked, staring into the darkness outside the window. Greg chose his words carefully. That's for you to decide. But he is your father. Despite his mistakes. The next day, Caroline went to the hospital. However, when she reached the ICU entrance, her feet wouldn't move. She turned around and went home. Harold was discharged a week later. His recovery was going well, but the event had clearly changed him. Gone was the image of the confident businessman, now he slouched with an anxious expression. Martha was in an even more miserable state. The social isolation and her husband's hospitalization had depleted her mentally and physically. Her sophisticated appearance had crumbled, with dark circles of fatigue under her eyes. According to Marianne, friends hadn't come to visit, the church groups hadn't provided meals, and Harold's business partners had proceeded with important deals without waiting for his recovery. The social network they had built over many years had collapsed overnight. 3 days after the discharge, Martha called Caroline again. This time, her voice mixed deep fatigue and surrender rather than anger. "Caroline, please, help," she said brokenly. "I can't take it anymore. I have to manage Harold's medication, the housework, everything alone. Our friends have abandoned us. Marianne is too busy." "You said you could handle things yourself," Caroline said coldly. "What you need is a sincere apology to Adrienne. And to me." "Fine," Martha answered with surprising docility. "I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you say. Just, please help." Caroline remained steadfast afterward. She refused to delete the social media post or provide support to her parents. In her heart, years of suffering had suddenly surfaced. 4 days later, on Saturday, when Caroline, Greg, and Adrienne returned from shopping, an astonishing sight awaited them. Martha and Harold were kneeling on the porch by the front door. Both were wearing plain clothes they wouldn't normally wear, and their faces were pale with fatigue. As Caroline got out of the car, her parents bowed their heads deeply. "What are you doing?" Caroline asked in bewilderment. "Please, Caroline," Martha said without raising her face, her voice trembling. "We have no one else to turn to. We were wrong. About Adrienne, about you, we've been wrong all along." Harold didn't raise his head either. The man who once exuded dignity was now completely defeated. "We're not asking for forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable. Just, please hear us out." Greg kept Adrienne waiting in the car, monitoring the situation. Caroline stood frozen, looking down at her parents. Anger and complex emotions collided within her. But suddenly, Adrienne burst out of the car. He had been watching his grandparents through the window. "Grandma, are you crying?" he asked with genuine concern in his voice. "What's wrong?" Martha finally raised her face at the sound of her grandson's voice. Tears were streaming from her eyes. "Adrienne. Grandma did something bad. Something very bad." Adrienne looked up at his mother with a confused expression. Caroline took a deep breath and felt something loosening inside her. She placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "Let's go inside," she finally said. "I'll hear what you have to say." Martha and Harold stood up shakily. Both seemed to have numb legs and supported each other as they rose. "Thank you," Harold said in a small voice. "Thank you so much." As Caroline opened the front door, she said in a calm voice, "I'm only listening for Adrienne's sake, and on the promise that you will never hurt him again." Her parents nodded in unison. "I promise," Martha said. "We'll absolutely keep it," Harold added. Adrienne tugged at his grandfather's sleeve. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Tears welled in Harold's eyes. He gazed at Adrienne and tentatively placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Grandpa is okay, Adrienne. Things are going to get better from now on. I promise." 6 months had passed. Crocuses planted in Caroline's garden were emerging from the ground, announcing a new beginning. Rebuilding a good relationship with the Simmons family was a process requiring the patience and time of melting a glacier. After that long conversation on Saturday night, Caroline agreed to give Martha and Harold a second chance. However, the walls in her heart hadn't completely collapsed yet. Surprisingly, Martha and Harold kept their promise. They devoured books about developmental disabilities and began attending lectures at local support groups. As Harold's health recovered, he became particularly eager to build a relationship with Adrienne. For Adrienne's birthday, Martha and Harold brought thoughtfully chosen gifts, a complete set of animal guides and volunteer experience tickets at a local animal sanctuary. Most importantly, they began to listen earnestly to Adrienne's stories. "Grandpa, this dog is called a border collie," Adrienne explained excitedly on his first day volunteering at the sanctuary. "They're super smart." Harold knelt beside his grandson, listening intently. "Is that so? What can they do?" Caroline watched the scene from a distance. The process of forgiveness within her was progressing slowly, but seeing Adrienne gradually opening his heart to his grandparents, she too was beginning to melt her ice walls bit by bit. Socially, Martha and Harold struggled to regain their former standing. Many friendships were forever lost, and Harold had resigned from his Chamber of Commerce position. Surprisingly, they seemed to be accepting this situation. "It hurt when our old friends left," Martha confided to her daughter one day. "But it taught me who our real friends are, and what truly matters." One evening in June, Caroline invited her parents for dinner. After Adrienne went to bed, the three sat on the patio in the backyard. Under the starry sky, Caroline voiced a question she had been considering for a long time. "What changed you? Have you really changed? Or were you just afraid of isolation?" Martha and Harold looked at each other, and after a long silence, Martha spoke. "We realized the value of what we had only after losing it," she said quietly. "That there are things more important than pride or social status." Harold added, looking up at the starry sky, "As the end of life approaches, I finally understood that what we leave behind isn't wealth, but love." He turned to Caroline. "It might be too late, but I want to prove it with the rest of my life." Caroline said nothing but nodded slightly. Complete forgiveness and restoration of trust would still take time. But tonight, under the starry sky, she felt the possibility of a new beginning. The next morning, when Adrienne learned his grandparents were coming, he jumped with joy. "Are we going to see Grandpa and Buddy?" he asked, hugging his dog plushie. Harold had given him a brown Labrador plushie last month. "Yes, Adrienne," Caroline smiled. "Today is a special day." Just then, Greg entered the kitchen. He put his arm around Caroline's shoulder and whispered in her ear, "Are you okay?" "Yes," she answered quietly. "It's not perfect yet, but we're moving forward."